Giving our closing keynote, our next speaker leads the front-end engineering organization at Indeed and will be sharing with us some hard-earned lessons learned while influencing a large organization. Please put your hands together for Rebecca Murphey.
All right. I feel like I should all gather closer, but I'm not going to make you move, because if you move, you might get up and leave, and I don't want that. So thank you to everyone who has stuck it through to the end of the day. I know at the end of the day yesterday, I was feeling a little rough and done with these chairs. So thank you for still being here. I'm Rebecca. I'm still getting used to saying this, but I'm a manager. That's weird. I'm an engineering manager at Indeed, and today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what I do there and kind of my last year and a half there. And it was a year and a half ago that I started at Indeed, and my first day is forever captured on my badge, which of course I have to wear every single day. And I woke up, I don't know how well you can tell in the picture, but I woke up the day before with allergies so bad that literally one of my eyes wouldn't open. And thankfully, by that Monday, I just looked like I had been crying all night, so that was a good way to kick things off. And I wear that badge every day, of course, and those puffy but optimistic eyes are kind of a good reminder of how far I've come. If you haven't heard of Indeed, we help people get jobs. It says so on my shirt. So that's us, that's our mission. And we help about 200 million plus some, I'm not sure what number I'm supposed to say these days, but more than 200 million job seekers look for and find jobs every month. And I joined Indeed to lead its front-end engineering practice, which is kind of funny because when I joined, there really wasn't a front-end engineering practice to lead. Obviously, front-end engineering was happening. We have a website, so somebody's got to write the code that makes pixels show up in the browser, but as often as not, it was just really smart full-stack engineers writing front-end code. And that approach had worked really well for a number of years, but as the front-end world got more and more complex, and as Indeed expanded beyond just a simple job search engine, that approach of hire smart people, they'll do smart things, it was starting to show some cracks. And the care and attention that was being paid to front-end engineering, it really varied from one engineer to the next. Some people were really into it and really took their time to do a great job, and some people really not their thing, but they were still doing it. So what I wanted to talk about today is how I've approached the work of changing that, to go from an organization that had no front-end practice, no front-end specialization, no front-end organization, and introduce a front-end engineering practice to that company. There are a few things before I get started that I just want to acknowledge are kind of unique about my situation. Sometimes I think, oh, well, these didn't really matter, but then I realized they really did matter because a lot of what I'm going to tell you, I tried to do at my last job, and it didn't go so well. So number one, I was a brand new employee at a rapidly growing company. What this means is I was new, but so were lots of other people. There were also a number of people who had been there for quite a long time. A weird thing about Indeed is that no one ever leaves. And so we had people who this was maybe their first or second job ever, but they'd actually been doing it for a number of years and hadn't necessarily been exposed to the way that front end was happening beyond Indeed. I came from a non-traditional background, and this was mostly about my own self-doubt and anxiety around that, going to a company that had hired really great CS grads from really great schools. And, I used to bartend, did some waitressing, worked in a newspaper for a while, dropped out of school. So I was coming from a very non-traditional background relative to the people I was trying to influence. And then the third thing, and this was a really powerful thing, I think, was that I was working with this really strong culture of data-driven, mission-driven decision-making. We all wear these shirts, and it's up on the wall, but it's like a real thing. And we sometimes make decisions that are not near-term good for the company, but are long-term good for job seekers. We really live this mission. We also really live data. We have whole conversations that happen where we're just like passing links back and forth, and those links are just to like queries of our data backend to show graphs of like, but what about this? But what about this? But what about this? And that data-driven approach really levels the playing field about who can have influence. And it means that things don't happen on a whim. Things happen because data says that those things should happen. And that's both a blessing and a curse. The last thing I want to point out that is different about, or noteworthy about my situation is this part. I'm a woman. I'm a woman in a male-dominated field. I'm a minority in my field and at my place of work. And I can't point to any specific way that this has changed my experience or made it harder or easier or anything for me to achieve what I've achieved. But I think that it's worth acknowledging that the work that you do to change an organization might be different when you are a minority in that organization versus when you're in the majority. So, for the next little bit, I want to share 8 lessons from my year and a half of trying to elevate and legitimize front-end engineering in a culture of really smart people who hadn't traditionally paid it a whole lot of attention. And I actually have like 20 lessons, but I also only have 30 minutes, so we're going to do 8. 8. The other thing that I want to say is maybe you're in a position of trying to do something like this, maybe your early career. You don't have to be in a position, I'm going to hope that this is true, that you don't have to be in a position of leadership or management in order for some of these lessons to be relevant to you. The fact that you're here at a conference means you probably care about the work that you do, and you're probably more likely than some of your coworkers to want to agitate for some kind of change. Just the fact that you're here and paying attention to the front-end world. So I'm hopeful that even if you weren't in exactly my situation, this stuff is still relevant. To the extent that I've been successful, it's really hard to imagine how I could have done it without a sponsor. And when I say this, it's kind of like saying, well, if you want to be rich, then it really helps if you start with $1 million. Because that would be a pretty effective way to get rich. But it really is that kind of lift that you get from having a sponsor, someone who is willing to invest their own political and social capital to see you succeed. And this doesn't necessarily mean that your sponsor is like throwing their weight around and saying, you'd better listen to Rebecca. It's the opposite of that, really. It means someone who's willing to share their institutional knowledge, share their context to help you be successful. And importantly, they don't tell you what to do. They help you figure out how to figure out what you should be doing. And how this is going to work. I was really lucky to have someone like this who I look back at the last year and a half and the number of times, he has never, except like, you need to fill out this spreadsheet so we can plan for Q4 hiring. Like, other than that, he's pretty much never told me what I needed to do. He's given me a long leash, let me figure it out, and kind of reoriented me when I was maybe a little bit off the path. When I started at Indeed, I don't know, how many of you have switched jobs? Okay, like, I hope almost everybody's switched jobs. So at my job before I started at Indeed, I had been there like 3 years, and everyone in engineering knew who I was, at least to like smile at me. It wasn't that big, like there were, I don't know, there were maybe a couple hundred engineers. I didn't know everyone by name, and maybe everyone didn't know me by name, but we all knew, like, I work here and you work here, and we can smile at each other because of that. And maybe, like, wave or something. Nothing too wild and crazy, but so when it showed up at Indeed, which was bigger and has this awesome cafeteria that really, on your first day, just feels a whole lot like high school, and you're halfway through the year and you don't know where to sit or who you're supposed to sit with, and maybe you'll just go eat by your desk and put your headphones on. That was kind of my first day and weeks and several weeks of kind of figuring out where I belonged and what my job even was. And the whole reason I was at Indeed was because you weren't at Indeed. Like, there was no front-end community there. And so in past jobs, I had been really accustomed to like finding my front-end folks, and there was like the front-end club, and we all like JavaScript, and we could like bond about that. But it was, none of those people were there. That was the whole reason I was there. So it was up to me to find my people, not just to sit with at lunch, but also to help me navigate Indeed. And this, in hindsight, was a really big deal, to be creative about finding the people who wanted the same thing that I wanted, or who had gone through a similar effort as I was going through. And I couldn't look to my front-end buddies, but I was able to look to, for example, release engineering. This is the team that's responsible for building and maintaining the tools that let us put code into production. And it's an interesting gatekeeping group. This is the team that in order to ship code, you go through their system. And they have the unenviable task of, for example, maintaining Jenkins, my favorite tool. So they have a lot of experience working across products and developing systems that will work across products. And they don't really know much about front-end engineering. Like, if you've seen Jenkins, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, but they have a lot of experience influencing product teams, sometimes with a carrot of like, ooh, we built this new cool thing for you, and sometimes with a stick of, if you don't increase your unit test coverage, your builds are going to stop working. And so I was able to work with them both philosophically and tactically to plug into the systems that they had built to achieve some of the things that I was trying to do. I was able to, they were really kind of my allies in change and my allies in cross-product influence. And I could talk to them about what's worked for them, who else do I need to talk to, how do I use the work that they've already done, what mistakes have they made. And so finding these people who, even though they don't look like the thing that they were doing doesn't look anything like the thing that I'm trying to do, realizing where those connections are and realizing that you're not doing anything that has to do with front end, but you are doing something that has to do with change and influence and scope, and I have stuff that I can learn from you. When I started, I mentioned how Indeed is really a very data-driven company. And so when I started, I had to figure out what the connection was going to be between the change that I just wanted to see because, yay, front end, and the things that the business actually cares about. Because, like, yay, front end wasn't really like can't really put that on a quarterly report or anything. And so it also, because we're really data-driven, it wasn't enough that my boss thought something was a good idea. I had to be able to demonstrate its impact to people across the business. You know, Jack wasn't going to be like, yeah, Rebecca can do what she wants because I told her so. It really was figuring out how I could do work that would have demonstrable impact, things that I could point to in a graph that said, like, look, it's going up and to the right, or down and to the right, which is actually what I did, but that was good too, I promise. So I help people get jobs. It's our mission, yay. It's kind of hard to hypothesize how, like, improving our Webpack builds was gonna, like, fulfill that mission. I thought about that for a good long time, like, could I really come up with a story for that? And yet not so much. Like, it's pretty hard to draw a line between something, between those two things. But way too late, I learned that we have these kind of tent poles that hold up this mission. And those tent poles are simple, comprehensive, relevant, and fast. We believe that if we build products that are simple and comprehensive and relevant and fast, that will help people get jobs. And I was like, fast, that I can latch onto in the front-end world. And it gave me, those tent poles gave me the context to talk about why this work was important. I could pull up the median render time of the search results page in India and show how it had been getting higher and higher and higher and higher for the last year, and basically make a point that this has been getting worse because we haven't been paying attention to it. So our users who are trying to get jobs are getting more and more and more frustrated and paying more and more and more money, because the reason that's going up is because we're sending more and more data, and they're burning more and more and more battery, because the reason that's going up is because we're sending more JavaScript that their phones have to parse. And so it's able to actually create a straight line between I help people get jobs and the work that I wanted to do. And I could show that like front-end engineering can actually fix that. Like if we just start paying attention to this and put some alerts in place that recognize this is getting worse and do some targeted work to make this better, I can help people get jobs through through front-end engineering. And we were able to shave seconds off of the median render time of the search results page in India, for users in India. And just by doing like, honestly, fairly remedial front-end engineering. And that was the beginning of the rest of my life, basically at Indeed, doing that work and demonstrating like, oh, we need these people. We weren't doing this on our own. We need these people. So it was also a lot about helping people understand through changes like that and other changes that front-end engineering was not actually about pixels on the screen. It was not about writing better CSS. It materially impacts the job seeker experience. Front-end engineering is not just a bunch of best practices that we do to feel good about ourselves. It's a thing that materially impacts the user experience. In the opposite direction of that really happy story was a really not sad, that's dramatically overstating it, but after a few weeks, kind of getting my bearings, I joined this team that was really early stage. It was a new product, still trying to find product market fit, still trying to figure out what they were even doing. And I show up and I'm like, you should add ESLint. And they're like, we hate you. This is not what we are trying to accomplish right now. Like, making our JavaScript better is a distraction, and you just made it so that we can't release code for a couple of days while we deal with all these merge conflicts. And like, you are a terrible person, and we hate front end even more now. And so that was a really important lesson in trying to drive change, was to change the things that matter and leave the things that don't matter alone. Don't try and change, recognize that there are things that matter, like the experience of our flagship product, and there are things that definitely don't matter as much, and if we did want to influence those things, there's probably a different moment to do it, either earlier or later, but not right in the middle where they're trying to figure out whether they're viable at all. Once I knew what I was doing, it took a long time to think about how to actually talk about what I was doing. I knew it in my head, and I had a lot of words written down in a book, but I needed to figure out how to talk about it and get other people on board. It was important to impress upon people the full scope of a front-end engineering practice, that it wasn't just about we're going to make pixels prettier and write better HTML, because that didn't get anyone excited. A lot of people, their experience with front end was like, one time I had to build a button, and it had to have rounded corners, and it had to have gradients, and I got really angry. And that was like their whole experience with front end. And they had developed this limited and really negative opinion about what it meant to work on front end. So I had to explain that it's not just about the rounded corners and the gradient on the button, because I hate that part too, and I'm really bad at it. It's not just about pixels on the screen, it's about the operationalization of front end, that this is bigger. It's about error monitoring, performance monitoring, a deep understanding of HTTP and TCP and how they influence the user experience that our users have. How browsers parse and render our pages so we know that where you put that 70K script tag actually matters. Building offline web experiences and even introducing build-breaking steps into our workflow so that you can't write unmaintainable JavaScript, unmaintainable CSS, or at least you can't ship it. I had to prepare for sudden presentations. So there was one day I was sitting down with a back-end software engineer at breakfast, and suddenly I'm not just eating yogurt, I'm in presentation mode. And in that conversation, he was just being nice and just asking, like, so what are you working on? What do you do? How's your team? He's a really nice guy, but I'm not sure how much he really cared. And as I was explaining to him everything that I just said, that it's not just about pixels and that front-end engineering is so much more, you could see him go in the space of a couple of minutes from like blah, 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 UX, 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 to like, I want to help you. This is really, like, I had no idea. He had no idea that this was even a thing that you could be good at, or that you could expect other people to be good at. And so I learned how important it was for me to be prepared to talk about what I was doing all the time. Not to talk about it all the time, but to be ready all the time, in the elevator, in the walk from one building to another, at breakfast, in the lunch line. All those places, just be ready to talk about the work that you're doing, the change that you're trying to create. Speaking of that, every summer Indeed has this thing called Indeed University. And last year, it's happening right now, actually, but last year, somewhere between 80 and 90 college hires came to Austin for about 3 months to work on products. They build and iterate on product ideas over the course of the summer. And at the end of the summer, any of the product ideas that have gotten any traction, they can get funding and go on to be full-fledged Indeed products. And in 2015, we did this, and we had a really great setup for these new college grads. We had like logging, infrastructure, A/B testing, monitoring, deployment, like all of it. The whole back end just like ready to go. Lots of great documentation and tooling and automation. And then when it came to the front end in 2015, we were just like, yeah, just Google it. You know, should be good. And we hadn't built any infrastructure in 2015 around the front end development experience. And so the people who in the 2015 class left that class feeling like front end was hard. And they went into the world, and remember, we have very low attrition, and so these people are never going to leave. And so they went into the world of Indeed, thinking that front end was bad and hard and unpleasant. So in 2016, I saw that there was a really big opportunity to seed that population with people who didn't feel negatively about front end, to not tell them, go Google it, but to give them actual tools, documentation, and guidance that would help them be successful with front end. And so rather than just sending them to Google to learn about Webpack, and the next thing you know, they're like in a dark room crying, we tried to actually give them a full-fledged set of like nearly push-button tools for setting up a front-end development environment with Webpack and Babel and React and Redux and components and all these things. And so it turned out to be this great opportunity that I was really fortunate to take advantage of, to create an army of people who would tell my story and to reinforce the idea that front end could be a positive experience. And so when 80 or 90 of them left at the end of the summer, about a third of them came out of that reporting like, yeah, front end, I'd like to do that. And I got a big bonus, so that was cool. The lesson here is that giving people a positive experience with a small dose of the change that you're trying to create was incredibly powerful. These, a third of them, and granted, a third of 80 isn't that many, but it's more than zero. A third of them went out into the world caring about front end, knowing that it was something that they could be good at, and knowing that it was something they could expect others to be good at too. This was a hard lesson. It's kind of obvious when I say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. I built that tooling for Indeed University, and one of the things that we built was a component library. So you want a button, here's a button. Never have to write CSS for rounded corners ever again. Just use this button. And it was such a success at Indeed University that I came out of the summer thinking like, I want everybody to use this. It's so great. It made things so easy. And the hard lesson was that the fact that I had a repo and some documentation wasn't really sufficient. It turns out that telling computers what to do is really easy, but telling people what to do is actually quite hard. And so I hadn't done the hard work. I had done the work of writing the code, and the work of writing the code is like fun and like, ooh, buttons, ooh, form inputs. I had done that work. It felt very rewarding, but I hadn't done the hard work of getting UX and product and engineering to agree that this is a thing that we should spend time on, a thing we should invest in. And so I was going out saying, you should use this great stuff, but UX wasn't creating designs that used that great stuff. Product didn't understand the value of why they should care about this great stuff. And engineering was like, well, I would use this great stuff, but UX told me that my button should look like this. And so it was a really frustrating time for me, and a really hard lesson that when you're trying to drive change, code is not enough. Code is the easy part of it. I had to invest a lot more in people and process and relationships, and a lot less on building the technology. Around that same time, I was learning this lesson, which was that you have to make some people sad. And my boss warned me very early on when I was telling him some of the things I wanted to do, and he was like, Rebecca, your problem is not going to be adoption. Your problem is going to be that too many people are going to want to use these things too fast. And he was 100% right, because once people started to learn about front end and how much it mattered, and started to hear about the tools that I was building, and started to think about front end as a first-class citizen, there was a lot of demand for my time, a lot of demand for new features, a lot of demand for bug fixes, and I was still just one person. I hadn't taken the time to create an organization around me that would let me scale, and I had created more demand than I could meet, as my boss very presciently warned me. And so around the end of last year, I realized that I had to focus on what really mattered and set some clear priorities, and that meant saying no to people who I really wanted to help. And these days, I have a product partner who kind of helps me figure this stuff out, because I'm still not good at it. And he helps me figure out when to say yes, when to say no, how to make those decisions. But it was a hard thing for me. I think as engineers, we love making people happy. We love writing code to make people happy. I don't know about you, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but when you write code to solve a problem and your product manager, or your peer, or your boss, or whoever is happy about that, that is really rewarding, and I had to kind of shut off that message in my brain and stop getting that quick hit of code, reward, and dig into doing some of the hard work. And doing the hard work meant I had to say no to people while I was doing that hard work. So I remember sometime late last year, I was sitting at my desk, looking at LinkedIn profiles, writing notes about how to interview front-end candidates, drafting some career path and leveling documentation, and thinking about how the team should be organized and who they should report to. And suddenly I thought, I used to write JavaScript. What am I doing? What has happened to me? And a great mentor helped me see that somehow, this is still the weird part, I had reached a point in my career where the time I spent writing code was less impactful than the time I spent doing that harder work of figuring out how to grow a team and how to build people around this change that I had created a demand for. And so, basically, somehow I had been so successful at my goal of trying to demonstrate the need for a front-end practice and demonstrate the value of a front-end practice. I did that, check, and now I had to actually make there be a front-end practice. And it was a hard lesson for me to, again, kind of refocus my energies on that and step back from the work that I kind of was part of my identity of just I type on a keyboard. So these days I spend so much of my time talking to people. I describe it as show up to a room and say smart things. That's kind of my job a lot. And I know that it's valuable, but I'm still really adjusting. I look back at my week, and it's weird when I think about what I've done this week. I'm looking at my calendar, not at Jira. And It's also, though, really amazing to see kind of the leverage that I've created by growing this team. I started as one person in an organization that was like, yeah, I guess we'll let you come do front-end stuff only. And now I have a team of me, 8 engineers, a 9th one starting in September, maybe a 10th one starting in September, and a product manager and like, it's real, it's happening. And it's way harder than I ever knew it would be, so be careful what you wish for. I want to leave you with this, so you can get out of these chairs. For a long time, I was talking about all of this to various people. I was talking about all of this in terms of, like, we've got to change the culture. We've got to change the culture to, like, understand how important front end is. And finally, my sponsor and boss, I think this was just like a sudden, like, do you have a minute? I need to talk to you. It wasn't even at a one-on-one or anything. He just like had an intervention with me. He's like, Rebecca, when you say that you want to change the culture, that really freaks people out. People like the culture. And that was a big aha moment for me, that I was actually kind of maybe scaring people a little bit with how much I was talking about change. And so we arrived at, instead of talking about changing the culture, we talked about using the culture to influence the change that we wanted to see. Tracy's nodding. She's like, yeah. I missed your talk this morning. Maybe you already said this. I don't know. But yeah. And seriously, like, the rest of what I said today, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not. But really, this, I could have just put this slide up on the screen and walked away, and you could have clapped. Because this is it. This is the biggest lesson of trying to drive change in an organization, is you have to use the culture. You might even have to love the culture. You have to use the culture to drive that change. I'm Rebecca. Thanks for having me.